Jake, I can't stand having Dad in this house anymore. He's a burden, and on top of that, he's costing us too much. I found a cheap place, just $800 a month. If we send him there, we'll finally be free." Those were the words I heard one late afternoon, sitting in my own kitchen under the dim yellow light. My daughter's voice. Cold. Calculated. Not meant for me, but for her husband. She had pressed the wrong button, and the message landed in my phone instead of his. For a moment, the world froze. My chest tightened, my hands trembled, and the walls I had built with my own hands decades ago seemed to close in on me. But then, through the storm inside me, one thought rose higher than the rest. This burden she despised was not as weak as she believed. I swore I would rise. I would reclaim my dignity. My name is John Miller. I am 68 years old, with silver hair that no longer shines, but still carries the stubborn resilience of a man who has lived through storms. My face is weathered, carved by decades of labor and sacrifice, yet my build remains lean and strong. Years of carpentry gave me both scars and strength, each line on my hand, a reminder that wood, like life, must be shaped with patience, sweat, and persistence. This house, the very place where I sat, listening to my daughter's voice betray me, was built with those same hands. Every nail, every beam, every board was chosen and placed by me. It wasn't just a structure, it was a testament to love, sacrifice, and the dream of raising a family under a roof I had earned. I had never imagined it would one day become the place where my own child plotted my removal. Emily, my daughter, was once the very reason for my existence. I remember her as a little girl, with brown hair that caught the sunlight and eyes full of ambition. She had been my pride, the proof that my sacrifices were worth something. She was brilliant in school, determined, and full of dreams. I worked double shifts, often late into the night, just to afford her education. I skipped vacations, new clothes, even proper meals, so she could attend college. When she walked across that stage in her graduation gown, I felt richer than any man alive. But life has a cruel way of twisting what you treasure most. Emily grew into a tall, sharp-featured woman, admired by many for her career in an office downtown. Yet, along the way, her warmth hardened into coldness. She valued success, image, and control more than compassion. Where once she would run into my arms, she now offered me clipped words and impatient glances. Then there was Jake, my son-in-law. He entered our lives with a smile that seemed genuine at first. A factory supervisor, he carried himself like a man who understood hard work. I welcomed him, even respected him. But as years passed, the cracks appeared. His smile grew thinner, his words heavier with greed. Where I saw family, he saw convenience. Where I offered generosity, he sought opportunity. When Emily and Jake invited me to live with them, I thought it was love. They told me, "Dad, we want you close. We don't want you alone." My heart swelled at their kindness. For 3 years, I shared a roof with them, believing I was surrounded by family warmth. But the reality was far colder than I dared admit. It began subtly. Jake would complain about my old television. "Your television is too outdated, Dad. It doesn't even stream right, and the internet's too slow because of the way you use it." I brushed it off, telling myself he was only trying to help. Emily added her own remarks. "Dad, this house is too big. You can't keep up with the maintenance anymore. Maybe selling it would be smarter." Again, I forced a smile, convincing myself they were simply concerned about me. But the tone of their voices told another story. It wasn't care, it was calculation. Still, I swallowed my doubts, choosing silence over confrontation. I began to notice whispers when I entered the room, conversations that halted abruptly, eyes that shifted away as though I were intruding. I told myself it was my imagination, that they were just busy, just tired. But deep inside, a seed of unease was taking root. "You must understand, I am a man who has always given more than he kept for himself. When my wife passed away 20 years ago, I devoted myself entirely to Emily. I was both father and mother, breadwinner and comforter. I gave up friendships, chances to remarry, even personal dreams, because my only focus was her happiness. In my mind, her success was my success. Her smile was my reward. That is why the voice message cut so deep. It wasn't just words spoken carelessly, it was the unveiling of a truth I had long avoided. To Emily and Jake, I wasn't a father, not even family. I was a burden, a weight they wanted to cast aside. Looking back, the signs had been there all along. Emily had grown distant. She would spend hours at work, coming home only to sit with her phone, scrolling with a disinterest that made me feel invisible. Jake, meanwhile, often dismissed me with casual remarks. "Dad, you're retired. Why don't you just rest and let us handle things?" Yet the things he referred to were often my own possessions, my finances, even my decisions. I remember one evening sitting in the living room as they watched television. A commercial came on, one of those retirement home ads with smiling seniors playing bingo. Jake nudged Emily, chuckling. "That's where your dad should be. He'd fit right in." Emily laughed lightly, not even glancing my way. I forced a grin, pretending I hadn't heard, but inside, something twisted painfully. I stayed quiet, because that's what I had always done. I told myself, they're young, they don't understand, they'll see my worth one day. But the truth was crueler. They had already decided my worth, and it was far less than I had imagined. The night I heard that message, my mind reeled with memories. The scraped knees I had bandaged when Emily was little. The nights I sat up sewing her school projects because she had fallen asleep. The weekends I worked overtime to afford her prom dress. And later, the day I sold my truck, my favorite possession, to cover her college books. Each memory clashed with her cold words like a hammer striking glass. I realized then that love is not always returned. Sacrifice does not guarantee loyalty. Sometimes, the ones you lift highest are the first to push you down when they no longer need you. Still, I want you to know something important. I did not hate Emily. Betrayal does not erase love. It only reshapes it into something unrecognizable. What I felt was not hatred, but a profound grief, as though I had lost my daughter long before she spoke those words. And yet, beneath that grief, another feeling stirred. A determination I had not felt in years. I was not ready to be discarded. I was not some useless old man to be hidden away in a nursing home. I had built a life from nothing. I had endured loss, pain, and hardship. I had raised a daughter against all odds. If Emily thought I was weak, then she had forgotten who I was. This was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning of a fight. I never thought I would have to wage a fight, not for riches or recognition, but for dignity, for the right to exist without shame, for the right to remind my daughter, and perhaps myself, that I was still a man worth respecting. It started in the small corners of daily life, the places where family should feel safest. The living room in the evenings became less of a gathering place and more of a silent battlefield. Jake would sit with his arms folded, glancing at my old television like it was a relic, dragging down the whole house. "Your television is too old, Dad," he would say with that flat tone, not even looking at me. "The internet's too slow because of how you use it. Maybe it's time you let us upgrade things." His words weren't suggestions. They were barbs, carefully dressed as casual remarks. Emily would chime in, sometimes from the kitchen, her voice cool and practical. "Dad, this house is just too much for you. You can't keep up anymore. The gutters, the lawn, the repairs, you don't need all this stress. Selling the house might be smarter." She would say it as if she cared about my health. But the sharpness in her eyes betrayed something else. There was no softness, no genuine concern, only calculation. I smiled through it all. Forced, painful. I told myself they were simply looking out for me, trying to guide me. That's what parents do. We give the benefit of the doubt to our children, even when doubt gnaws at us, like termites in the beams of our trust. I nodded, swallowed their words, and let silence be my shield. But silence, I would learn, is a dangerous ally. It allows shadows to grow unchecked. One evening, I walked into the living room while Emily and Jake were seated close together. The moment my footsteps touched the floor, their conversation stopped. Their eyes flicked toward me, then away, as if I had interrupted something private. My heart skipped, but I pushed the thought aside. I asked, "What were you two talking about?" Emily replied too quickly, "Work stuff, Dad. Nothing you'd understand." Her tone cut me deeper than she realized. I wasn't just excluded, I was dismissed, as though my years of wisdom and sacrifice had no weight in her world anymore. After that, I noticed more moments like that. Whispered words when I entered a room. Quiet exchanges that ended abruptly when I appeared. Glances between them that felt like silent agreements against me. Still, I clung to hope. I told myself, maybe I'm just sensitive, maybe it's nothing. But deep down, the cracks in the foundation of trust were spreading, like tiny fractures in glass. Jake, who once had shown me respect, began to shift in tone. His patience grew thin, his words sharper. He would sigh loudly if I asked for help with small tasks. If I cooked dinner, something I loved to do, he would mutter that it was too greasy or too old-fashioned. Emily, instead of defending me, would nod in agreement, her lips pressed tight. The home that should have been a place of belonging was turning into a stage where I played the part of an unwanted guest. The worst moments were not the insults themselves, but the loneliness they created. At night, I would sit in my room, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling I had built, and wonder how my life had turned into this. I thought about my wife, long gone, and asked myself silently, would she recognize this daughter we raised? Would she believe what we've become? The silence of the empty room offered no answers. Then came the first real crack in the mask. I had been carrying a tray of tea into the living room when I overheard them speaking softly. Jake's voice was tense. "He's in the way, Emily. We can't keep living like this." Emily hushed him, her eyes darting to where I stood, half hidden in the hallway. She changed the subject quickly, but the words had already pierced me. In the way. That's what I had become in their eyes, not a father, not even a person, but an obstacle to be moved. The days blurred together, each one a little colder than the last. Small humiliations piled up like dust in corners. Emily corrected me in front of neighbors, saying, "Dad forgets a lot lately. Maybe he's losing it." Her voice carried just enough volume for others to hear. I saw the pity in their eyes, the doubt planted like seeds that would eventually grow into judgment. My dignity was being stripped, not in one swift motion, but in slow, deliberate cuts. I stayed silent, because that's who I had always been, a man who endured. But endurance, I realized, can sometimes be mistaken for weakness, and weakness, in the eyes of those who no longer love you, becomes permission. Looking back, those were the days when I should have spoken, when I should have drawn a line, but love blinded me and habit chained me. I believed in the bond between father and daughter, even as it frayed before my eyes. I convinced myself that her sharp words were stress from work, that Jake's coldness was fatigue. I told myself families go through seasons, and this was just winter. Surely spring would come, but spring never came. Instead, the air in that house grew heavier. My presence was no longer neutral, it was resented. The whispers turned into pointed conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. Their laughter behind closed doors was different, sharp, secretive, like conspirators sharing a plan. And I began to feel like an intruder in the home I had once believed was my sanctuary. One night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, I traced the scars on my hands, the proof of decades of labor, the sacrifices I had made for Emily. And I whispered to myself, maybe I was wrong. Maybe she never saw me the way I saw her. It was a thought so heavy, it nearly crushed me. Because if that was true, then everything I had lived for was nothing more than a shadow. And yet, even then, even in the sharpest sting of doubt, I still loved her. That is the curse of a parent's heart. I didn't know it then, but the storm was only gathering. The small cracks were just the beginning. Soon, the truth would roar into my life, and the foundation I had built would shatter completely. The first time I truly saw through the cracks in their mask was on a Saturday afternoon. I had spent hours preparing Jake's favorite barbecue ribs, slow-cooked the way he once bragged about to his friends. I carried the tray across the backyard, imagining the gratitude on his face, the way a simple meal might soften the growing distance. But when I walked inside, I stopped in my tracks. Emily sat at the table with her cousin Carol, papers spread between them like secret maps. At the sight of me, they scrambled, shoving the documents into a folder with clumsy haste. Their eyes darted up, masks of surprise poorly painted over guilt. "Dad," Emily said quickly, her tone too bright. "You didn't tell us you were making ribs." She reached for a napkin, as though the shuffle of papers had been nothing more than grocery lists. Carol smiled stiffly, the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals. I set the tray down, but my heart was no longer in it. I wanted to ask what those papers were, but my throat tightened. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "Hope you're hungry." Later that night, I lay in bed, the image of those papers replaying in my mind. Why would they hide something from me? And why would Carol, who worked at the county clerk's office, be involved? The thought gnawed at me, but I buried it deep. To confront, Emily felt like tearing open a wound I wasn't ready to see bleed. The whispers became louder after that day, not in volume, but in meaning. Emily started making offhand comments to neighbors, her voice carrying just enough to stain my reputation. "Dad forgets things a lot lately. I'm worried he's losing track," she said once, loud enough for Mrs. Thompson across the street to raise her brows in sympathy. I felt the weight of those words settle on me like a shroud. Each look of pity from the neighbors, each soft question, "Are you doing okay, John?" was another stone stacked on my chest. It wasn't just in public. Emily and Jake's treatment of me shifted at home too. They invited me to lunch several times, asking me to meet them at a small diner we used to enjoy. Each time, I dressed carefully, combing my silver hair, putting on the navy blue jacket I reserved for outings. Each time I sat alone at the booth, watching the door. 1 hour, 2, my plate grew cold, my coffee bitter, and each time no one came. When I returned home, there was always an excuse. "Sorry, Dad, something came up at work," or "We thought we told you we had to cancel." After the 4th time, I stopped dressing for lunch. Humiliation is not always loud. Sometimes it comes quietly, like rain soaking into old wood until it warps. I felt myself bending, losing shape under the weight of their indifference. Then Emily began to watch my finances. She came into my room one evening holding a bank statement. "Dad," she said, her voice carefully measured, "you're not getting any younger. Why don't you let me handle these? You shouldn't stress about bills at your age." I reached for the papers, but she pulled them back slightly, her lips tightening. Something in her tone, too smooth, too rehearsed, sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. I told her I could manage, that I had been balancing checkbooks since before she was born. She laughed softly, a humorless sound. "That's exactly my point, Dad. Times have changed. You don't need to worry about this anymore." She walked away with the papers still in her hand. That night, I sat staring at the empty desk where my documents once were. I realized I was being stripped piece by piece. My authority, my independence, my dignity, they weren't taking it in one blow. They were dismantling me slowly, like termites hollowing a beam until it collapses under its own weight. I wanted to believe Emily was just overwhelmed, that Jake was just careless. But the truth pressed against me like a cold wind. The way they whispered, the hidden papers, the rumors about my memory, the bank statements disappearing. Each piece was part of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. I remember standing in front of the mirror that night, staring at my reflection, my silver hair, the lines etched deep into my face, the eyes that had once been full of hope, now clouded with questions. "Am I really losing it?" I whispered to myself. For a terrifying moment, I doubted my own mind. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe I was slipping. But then I thought of the ribs, the folder of papers, the missed lunches. No, this wasn't forgetfulness. This was deliberate. I was being erased. Still, I kept my silence. Not because I was blind, but because I wasn't ready. A part of me still clung to the memory of Emily as my little girl with pigtails running into my arms after school. I couldn't reconcile that image with the woman plotting behind my back. Love made me weak, and weakness made me quiet. But the silence wouldn't last much longer, because soon one mistake, one message not meant for me, would tear away the last curtain and reveal the betrayal in its full, brutal light. The breaking point came quietly, almost unremarkably, like the last drop of water that finally cracks stone. I was in the kitchen early one morning making coffee when I heard Emily in the living room speaking on the phone. Her voice was low, urgent, but the walls of this old house carried sound like whispers through wood. "Jake," she said, "I can't keep doing this with him here. He's costing us too much. Carol said she can push the papers through if we're ready. Dad won't even know what's happening. A few signatures, a doctor's note, it'll be airtight." I froze, mug in hand. My heart pounded so loud I was sure she'd hear it. Carol, papers, doctor's note. The words tangled together in my head, forming a picture too cruel to ignore. They weren't just planning to send me away, they were preparing to strip me of my home, my life, everything I had built. I stepped back from the doorway, silent, careful. For a moment, I wanted to walk in, confront her, shout her name like thunder, but something inside told me to wait. A storm, to be survived, requires patience. Instead, I returned to my chair, staring at the steam rising from the cup as though it might spell out my fate. The days that followed were suffocating. Emily began to speak more openly about my supposed decline. "Dad, you keep forgetting things. It's dangerous." She said this when I misplaced my glasses. Never mind that Jake had left them on the counter after moving my mail. At dinner, if I stumbled on a word, she would glance at Jake, her lips pressed in mock concern. "See what I mean?" she whispered. Not softly enough. I was being painted into a corner. Piece by piece, a portrait of me as a senile, incapable man was being drawn. I could see the brushstrokes forming, but I had no way to stop them. Neighbors began to ask if I needed help with errands. The bank teller looked at me with pity when Emily accompanied me. Even the doctor, during a routine checkup, tilted his head as if measuring my competence rather than my health. One evening, I found Jake in my study, rifling through drawers. When I asked what he was doing, he didn't flinch. "Looking for important documents," he said flatly. "You shouldn't keep track of these anymore. It's irresponsible." His audacity stunned me. That room was mine, my sanctuary of tools, papers, and memories. But in his eyes, it was already his territory. I walked past him, closing the drawer gently, and said only, "That's enough." But my voice trembled, betraying the storm inside. The cruelest cut came not from them, but from within myself. For the first time in my life, I began to doubt my own worth. I sat in my old workshop in the basement, running my fingers across the wooden bench, scarred with decades of projects, and I whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am too old." The thought hollowed me out, left me staring at the tools I once wielded with pride, now lying still and rusting in the dark. But then a memory rose unbidden. Emily, at 6 years old, standing beside me in that very basement, holding a tiny hammer too big for her hands. "Daddy," she said, "when I grow up, I'll help you build everything." Her voice was bright, full of promise, and I realized in that moment that the man who taught her to hold that hammer was still inside me. Age had not erased him, betrayal had not broken him. The silence between us grew heavier, thicker, until it pressed against every wall. I watched Emily and Jake exchange glances like conspirators, their laughter hollow, their kindness rehearsed. They believed they had me cornered, too blind to see through their act. And then it happened, the slip that changed everything. It was a late afternoon. The house was quiet, bathed in the dim yellow light of sunset. My phone buzzed on the counter. A voice message. I pressed play. Emily's voice spilled out, sharp and unguarded. "Jake, I can't stand having Dad in this house anymore. He's a burden, and on top of that, he's costing us too much. I found a cheap place, just $800 a month. If we send him there, we'll finally be free. Her words stabbed deeper than any blade, not because I didn't already suspect, but because suspicion became truth. The mask was gone. The whispers, the hidden papers, the staged concern, all of it crystallized into betrayal undeniable. I sat down on the kitchen floor, the phone still in my hand. The walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with the weight of her words. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My own daughter, the child for whom I had sacrificed everything, had condemned me to exile. But then, amid the devastation, something fierce rose within me. A fire I thought had long burned out reignited. I was not a broken man. I was not a burden. I was John Miller, a father, a builder, a survivor. As I stared at the phone, one thought crystallized. If they saw me as weak, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. This wasn't the end of my story. This was the beginning of my fight. The night after I heard that message, I barely slept. I lay awake in the old house I had built with my own 2 hands, staring at the ceiling beams that had carried both laughter and tears through the years. Every creak of the wood felt like a whisper reminding me of what I had lost. Emily's words played again and again in my mind, sharper each time. He's a burden. He's costing us too much. We'll finally be free. I rose before dawn, moving quietly so neither Emily nor Jake would hear me. I opened the wardrobe in my room and reached for the navy blue suit I hadn't worn in years. The fabric was stiff, smelling faintly of mothballs, but it carried a weight of memory. It was the same suit I wore the day I enrolled Emily in college, the day I signed away my savings so she could have a chance at a future. I brushed the dust from its shoulders, straightened the tie, and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back was older, yes, but not defeated. His eyes were lined with age, but also with fire. I whispered to my reflection, "They think I'm weak. They think I've forgotten who I am. But I remember. I built this house. I built this family. And I will not be erased." With that vow burning inside me, I left the house before the sun rose. My first stop was at the office of a lawyer, an old friend named Robert Hayes. He and I had served together on community boards decades ago. Robert was now retired, but he still carried the sharp mind of a man who had seen too much of human greed. When I walked into his office, his brows lifted in surprise. "John," he said, standing to shake my hand, "it's been years. What brings you here in a suit at this hour?" I sat down, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled out my phone. "Robert, I need your help. I think my daughter and her husband are planning to take everything from me, not just my house, but my dignity." He frowned, leaning closer as I pressed play. Emily's cold voice filled the room. When it ended, silence lingered like heavy smoke. Robert finally exhaled and said, "This is serious, John, more serious than you realize. If they've been working with Carol at the clerk's office, there could already be forged documents in play." His words hit me like a hammer. "Forged documents?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "Yes," Robert said gravely. "If Carol is involved, she could falsify property transfers, medical assessments, even power of attorney. If you don't act now, John, they could strip you of everything, your house, your accounts, your freedom. By the time you fight back, it would be too late." The thought sent a chill down my spine. For a moment, fear almost paralyzed me. But then, just as quickly, anger took its place. "Then we don't wait," I said firmly. "We make them face justice before they destroy me." Robert nodded, his eyes hardening. "We'll need proof. The voice message is strong, but more evidence will seal this. I'll arrange for an investigator to track down Carol's involvement. In the meantime, you must protect every document you still have, birth certificate, property deed, bank statements. Keep them hidden, somewhere they can't reach." I thought of Jake rifling through my drawers, of Emily snatching my bank statements with her rehearsed concern. My stomach churned. "They've already taken some," I admitted. "Then we act fast," Robert said. "I'll call in a notary and coordinate with the police. But John, this will not be easy. They will fight back, and it will hurt. Are you ready for that?" I sat silently for a moment. Ready? Could any father be ready to expose his own daughter's betrayal to the world? Could any man be prepared to watch his child fall from grace? But then I remembered the loneliness of those empty diners, the sting of whispers behind closed doors, the humiliation planted like weeds in the minds of my neighbors. And I remembered Emily's voice, saying she would finally be free once I was gone. Yes, I said at last, I'm ready. Because this isn't just about my house, it's about who I am. It's about showing them and myself that I am not finished. Over the next week, I followed Robert's instructions, like a soldier preparing for battle. I collected the papers I still had, locking them in a safe deposit box at the bank. I visited my doctor for a full evaluation, ensuring that no false medical report could claim I was unfit. I even sat down with a notary to draft a statement in my own handwriting, declaring my mental competence. But the hardest part was the act I had to play at home. Each evening, I returned to Emily and Jake, pretending as though nothing had changed. I smiled at their forced kindness, nodded through their condescending remarks, and waited. Inside, my heart burned with the knowledge of what was coming. It was a cruel performance, to share a table with those who plotted against me, but patience, I knew, would be my weapon. One night, Emily mentioned casually over dinner, "Dad, Carol might stop by next week. She wants to go over some papers with you." Her voice was too light, too cheerful. Jake smirked behind his glass. I forced myself to swallow the bite of food in my mouth and said simply, "That's fine, sweetheart. Whatever you need." My voice was calm, but inside, I felt like steel hardening in fire. When I left the table that night, I knew the moment was drawing near. They thought they were setting the stage for my downfall, but I was already building a stage of my own. One where the truth would be revealed not just to me, but to everyone. Robert called the following day. "We've got it," he said. The investigator confirmed Carol's involvement. "She's been accessing property records illegally, preparing a transfer of your house to Emily and Jake. And we found a draft of a medical note claiming you're mentally unfit to manage your finances." My throat tightened, but Robert continued. "Carol broke. She confessed when pressed. She's willing to testify in exchange for leniency." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. Betrayal from my daughter was one thing, but betrayal from family beyond her, it cut deeper than I thought I could bear. Yet at the same time, I felt a grim relief. Proof, evidence, the tools I needed to fight back. Robert's voice softened. "John, I know this is painful, but we must act quickly. Tomorrow morning we'll bring everything to light. Police officers, a notary, myself, will meet at your house. It will be hard, but it's the only way." I looked around my kitchen, the yellow light flickering against walls I had painted with my own hands decades ago. Memories clung to every corner, but so did betrayal. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Tomorrow then," I said. "Let's finish this." That night, I walked through every room of the house slowly, like a man saying goodbye. My footsteps echoed against wooden floors I had sanded, against walls that once held family photos, now replaced with sterile frames chosen by Emily. I touched the railing of the staircase I had built, the fireplace I had laid brick by brick, the window where I had once watched Emily play in the yard. At the end of the walk, I returned to the kitchen and sat in silence. The weight of what was coming pressed against me like a storm on the horizon. I whispered into the empty room, "Tomorrow, you'll see me, Emily. Not the burden you despise, not the old man you dismiss. You'll see your father, and you'll see the man who refuses to be erased." And with that vow burning in my chest, I closed my eyes and waited for dawn. The morning of reckoning arrived with a pale, heavy sky. I woke before the sun, my heart beating like a drum in my chest. The house was unnervingly quiet, as though it too sensed the storm about to break. I dressed carefully in my navy blue suit, the same one that had become a symbol of my strength. Each button I fastened was like a silent vow. Today, the truth would no longer hide in whispers. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Emily shuffled from the living room, still in her robe, frowning as she opened the door. Her expression shifted from irritation to confusion when she saw who stood there, Robert Hayes, upright in his grey suit, a notary beside him with a black briefcase. and 2 police officers whose presence filled the doorway like pillars of judgment. "Dad, what is this?" Emily's voice faltered, her mask slipping for the first time. Jake entered from the kitchen, his coffee mug halfway to his lips, and froze at the sight of the uniforms. His jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around the ceramic handle. I stepped forward, my voice calm but edged with steel. "This is the truth, Emily, the truth you tried to bury." Robert entered with practiced authority, setting a folder on the coffee table. "We have gathered evidence of attempted fraud, property manipulation, and medical misrepresentation," he announced. His voice carried the weight of law, firm and undeniable. "Mr. Miller's daughter and son-in-law stand accused of conspiring to strip him of his home and his rights." Emily's face drained of color. She turned to me, her eyes wide, searching for softness. "Dad, no, you've got this all wrong. We were just worried about you." But Robert cut her off sharply, his voice like a gavel. "Worried fathers are not spoken of as burdens. Shall we play the recording?" With deliberate calm, I pulled out my phone, pressing play. Emily's voice filled the room, cold and merciless. "Jake, I can't stand having Dad in this house anymore. He's a burden, and on top of that, he's costing us too much. I found a cheap place, just $800 a month. If we send him there, we'll finally be free." The words echoed against the walls. Emily's hands flew to her mouth, tears brimming, but it was too late. Jake muttered a curse under his breath, slamming his mug down so hard, coffee spilled across the table. "You idiot," he hissed at Emily. "I told you to delete that message." The officers shifted slightly, their presence heavy, their eyes locked on the two of them. Robert wasn't finished. He opened the folder, revealing documents stamped with Carol's signature. "We also have a confession from Carol signed and notarized. She admits to accessing county records illegally to prepare forged transfer documents of this property, and a falsified medical assessment declaring Mr. Miller incompetent. Your plan was thorough, I'll give you that, but not thorough enough." Emily collapsed onto the couch, sobbing now, her hands shaking. "Dad, please, I didn't mean, it wasn't supposed to go this far." Her tears cut into me like shards of glass. For a flicker of a moment, the father in me wanted to hold her, to wipe her tears, as I had when she was little. But the man she betrayed stood taller now, and he could not be silenced. "Emily," I said quietly, "I gave you everything. I sacrificed my life so you could have yours, and this is what you chose to give me in return." Jake, on the other hand, showed no tears. His face hardened into stone, his voice dripping with venom. "You think this changes anything, old man? You're still finished. You're weak, and nobody cares about you. Once they lock you away, we'll still end up with everything." The room went silent. The notary's pen clicked softly. The officers exchanged glances. And then Robert spoke, his voice sharp as lightning. "That's enough. Officers, you've heard his intent. You've seen the documents. Arrest them both for attempted fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse." The clink of handcuffs broke the silence. Emily screamed, jerking against the officer's grip. "Dad, please, don't let them do this. I'm your daughter." Her voice cracked into a plea that pierced the air. Jake cursed violently, thrashing as the cuffs clicked shut on his wrists. I stood rooted, my chest heavy with a storm of emotions. This was justice, but it felt nothing like triumph. It felt like mourning, like burying something precious that had already died long ago. As the officers led them toward the door, Emily twisted her head to look at me one last time. Her eyes were wild, a mixture of desperation and shame. "Please, Dad, forgive me. Don't let them take me." I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "Emily," I whispered, my voice steady though my hands trembled. "I will forgive you one day, but not today." She sobbed as the door closed behind her, the sound echoing like thunder through the quiet house. When silence finally settled, I felt both lighter and heavier at once. The truth had been spoken, the masks torn away, but the cost was greater than I had ever imagined. I sat in the very chair where I had once cradled Emily as a baby, the air thick with memories. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, John," he said softly. "It was the only way." I nodded slowly, though the weight in my chest told me that right and easy were never the same thing. The silence after Emily and Jake were taken away was unlike any silence I had ever known. It wasn't the gentle quiet of a peaceful home. It was heavy, suffocating, like the still air before a storm breaks again. I sat there for a long time, staring at the coffee stain Jake had left on the table, the ring of brown spreading like a scar across the wood. That stain, I thought, was the perfect symbol of what they had tried to do, something ugly, seeping into what I had built with care. Robert gathered the papers and looked at me with a calm, steady gaze. "John, I know this was hard, but you must understand it's not over. They may fight this in court. They may try to twist the narrative, paint you as confused or vindictive. You'll need strength, not just today, but in the months to come." His words were meant as warning, but they struck me as truth I was already prepared for. Strength, that was all I had left. For a few days, I lived in a strange haze. Neighbors whispered when they saw police cars at the house. Some came by with casseroles, their eyes full of pity, their voices soft. "We're so sorry, John. We had no idea." I nodded politely, though their sympathy felt hollow. What comfort could a casserole bring when your own daughter had tried to erase you? Then, almost a week later, the retaliation began. It started with letters, anonymous envelopes shoved into my mailbox. Inside were cruel words, scribbled in jagged handwriting. "Old man, you should have stayed quiet. Families don't betray each other. You betrayed her." Another note read, "You'll die alone in that house." My hands trembled as I read them, but I recognized the venom. Emily's friends, Jake's drinking buddies, maybe even Carol's relatives, they were lashing out, trying to make me regret defending myself. Then came the phone calls. Late at night, the phone would ring, and when I answered, silence pressed on the other end. Sometimes faint laughter, sometimes a voice whispering, "Burden." I changed the number, but somehow the calls found me again. One evening, as I returned from the grocery store, I found my fence vandalized, spray-painted with the words, "Selfish old man." My stomach twisted, and for a brief moment I felt the doubt creeping back. Was I selfish? Had I, in fighting for myself, destroyed what little family I had left? But then I looked at my hands, scarred, strong, calloused from decades of work. These were not selfish hands. These were the hands that built, sacrificed, and gave everything for Emily. The truth was simple. I had not betrayed her. She had betrayed me. The case moved quickly. With Carol's signed confession, the forged documents, and the voice message, the evidence was undeniable. Emily and Jake were formally charged with conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. The courtroom was cold, filled with faces both familiar and distant. Emily sat at the defense table, her once proud posture broken, her eyes hollow. Jake sat beside her, his jaw clenched in defiance. When I took the stand, my voice shook at first, but as I looked at the jury, then at Emily, I found my strength. "I'm not here to destroy my daughter," I said. "I am here to protect myself, to protect the dignity of every parent who has given everything for their children, only to be treated as disposable. I built my life on sacrifice and love, and I will not apologize for demanding the respect I have earned." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's gavel seemed hesitant to break the stillness. Emily lowered her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. For a moment, I thought I saw the little girl she once was, the child who had held my hand on the first day of school. But I reminded myself, love does not excuse betrayal. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. Emily and Jake were sentenced not to long years, but enough to mark their record, enough to strip away the power they had tried to wield over me. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon Sunday. The light felt sharper, clearer, as though the world itself had shifted. I inhaled deeply, the air filling my lungs with something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Yet freedom came with a shadow. I knew the damage could not be undone. Trust, once shattered, is never rebuilt the same way. My daughter had fallen, and though part of me grieved for her, another part stood firm. I would not allow her to pull me down with her. That evening, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I realized something profound. This fight was never just about my property or my dignity. It was about reclaiming my place in the world, not as a burden, but as a man who still had worth. The house was no longer a prison of betrayal. It had become a symbol of resilience. Every nail, every board, every brick reminded me that I had built not only a shelter, but a legacy. And no one, not Emily, not Jake, not anyone could take that away from me. When the courtroom doors closed behind me that day, I felt as though I had stepped into an entirely new life. The verdict had been read, the sentence passed, and yet I did not feel victorious. Victory implies celebration, a sense of triumph. What I felt was relief raw, aching relief that the storm had finally passed and that I was still standing. I returned to my house that evening, but it no longer felt the same. The walls that once held whispers of betrayal now echoed with emptiness. Every corner reminded me of the confrontation, of Emily's tears, of Jake's curses. I knew then that I could not stay. This house had been my pride, a symbol of my love and labor, but it had also become a battlefield, and no man, not even one as stubborn as me, can truly live in the ruins of a war zone. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I sold the house. I walked through each room one final time, running my hands along the banisters I had sanded smooth decades ago, touching the fireplace where we had once hung stockings at Christmas, standing in the doorway where I had watched Emily walk out in her prom dress. I whispered goodbye to the home, not as a defeat, but as a release. Some burdens are not carried by others, they are carried by places, and I could no longer carry this one. With the money from the sale, I moved into a senior community apartment just outside the city. At first, I dreaded it. I had always pictured those places as holding pens for the forgotten, where laughter was forced and days dragged on in monotony. But I was wrong. The moment I stepped into the garden courtyard, with its blooming roses and the sound of laughter drifting from the activity hall, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. Here, I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a man to be managed or hidden away. I was simply John Miller, a neighbor, a friend, a man with stories and skills that still had value. I took up painting, something I had always admired but never dared to try. My hands, once used to carving wood, now guided brushes across canvas, bringing to life the landscapes of memory, the old house, the backyard oak tree, the sunsets I had watched through my kitchen window. Each stroke felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had long buried. I joined dance classes too. At first, I laughed at the idea. A 68-year-old man with stiff joints trying to keep up with music? But as the weeks passed, I found joy in the rhythm, in the shared laughter when I missed a step, in the applause when I got it right. It wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. For the first time in years, I felt truly present in my own life. And perhaps most importantly, I began volunteering. Once a week, I visited a local shelter for abandoned seniors, men and women whose families had cast them aside, much like Emily had tried to do to me. I listened to their stories, offered my hands to fix broken chairs or mend torn clothing, and shared meals at long wooden tables. In their eyes, I saw both pain and resilience, and I realized I was not alone. Betrayal, as devastating as it is, does not define the end of a story. It can, in fact, mark the beginning of something greater. Months passed, and one day, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was from Emily. "Dad," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this, but I want you to know that I am sorry. Sorry for what I said. Sorry for what I did. Sorry for forgetting the man who raised me with everything he had. I am ashamed. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I beg for a chance someday to make it right. I read those words slowly, my chest heavy with emotions I couldn't name. For a long time, I sat in silence, the letter trembling in my hands. Then I picked up my pen and wrote my reply. Emily, I forgive you. Not because what you did was small, it wasn't. It cut me deeper than you will ever know. I forgive you because holding on to the pain would only poison me. But understand this, forgiveness is not forgetting. I will not forget what happened. I will not allow you to hurt me again. If you truly wish to make it right, live a better life. Treat others with the compassion you once lacked. That is the only redemption I can accept. Dad. I mailed the letter and felt a strange calm settle over me. Forgiveness was not for her, it was for me. It was the release of a weight I had carried for too long. Now, when I wake each morning, I no longer feel dread or fear. I brew my coffee, step out into the garden, and watch the sun rise over the community rooftops. I talk with neighbors, laugh with friends, paint the colors of memory onto blank canvases. I am no longer the man hiding in silence, nor the man trembling at betrayal. I am the man who stood up, who reclaimed his dignity, who chose peace over bitterness. I may have lost my daughter in one sense, but I found something I thought I had lost forever myself. If there is one truth I've learned through all of this, it's that love is not meant to chain us. True love, whether from a child, a partner, or a friend, should lift, not crush. It should protect, not exploit. And when love turns into control, when concern becomes manipulation, it is no longer love. It is something else entirely, something dangerous. For years, I believed that sacrifice alone could hold a family together. I gave everything, my time, my health, my dreams, because I thought it guaranteed loyalty. But sacrifice without respect is a hollow bargain. Parents, listen to me. We are allowed to give, yes, but we must never surrender our dignity. To live as a burden is not a fate handed to us. It is a lie told by those who have forgotten what we're worth. If you have ever felt betrayed by your own blood, let my story remind you of this. You are not disposable. You are not useless. You carry a lifetime of wisdom, of resilience, of love that still matters. Do not let anyone, not even those closest to you, strip that away. Stand tall. Speak your truth. Protect the legacy of who you are. I forgave my daughter, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness is not a ticket back into my life. It is a way for me to move forward without the chains of anger. And in forgiving, I discovered something powerful. I am still capable of joy. I am still capable of love. And I am still capable of building a life worth living. So, to everyone listening, remember this. No matter your age, no matter your scars, you still have the right to freedom, to respect, and to peace. You are never too old to rise again, never too broken to reclaim your worth. And if my story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength, then I ask you, stay with me on this journey. Share in these lessons, these scars, and these small victories. Because together, we can remind the world that at any age, in any season, we are still standing, we are still worthy, we are still alive.